Now, on the podcast, Jake Richards, a barrister who was an advisor to Labour's Rachel Reeves, who, of course, is the Shadow Chancellor. Jake, hello.
Hi, Calum.
Great to have you here. Right, first of all, marks out of 10 for Rachel Reeves' response. Before you do that, shall we have a little listen to it, or at least some of it? It was very lengthy, we won't play the whole thing, but here's 45 seconds for you to get some context.
What people will be asking themselves at the next election is this: are me and my family better off with a Conservative government? And the answer is no. The mess we are in is the result of 12 weeks of Conservative chaos, but also 12 years of Conservative economic failure. Growth dismal, investment down, wages squeezed, public services crumbling. And what does the Chancellor have to offer today? More of the same, with working people paying the price for his failure.
Was it predictable or on the money, Jake?
Look, I thought it was good. Her main task today was to ensure that Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak didn't get away with it. And what they were trying to get away with was saying this is all about global factors, global conditions, and we're the Tories, the grown-ups in the room, that are going to get us out of this mess. Rachel Reeves' sole job in the House of Commons was to say, hold on, you guys have crashed the economy, and now you can't be trusted to get us out of this mess. And I think she did that really, really well. There are big challenges for Labour ahead, but that is the central goal for Labour over the next 3 months. And I think she did that very powerfully today.
Yeah. How difficult is it in the run-up to a day like today, when you're trying to advise the shadow cabinet, a shadow cabinet member, how difficult is it to prepare for what she needs to say instantly as soon as the Chancellor sits down?
Yes, it is difficult. I mean, today was quite easy because there weren't any rabbits out of the hat. I remember George Osborne always used to keep one or two things to surprise us back in 2010, 2015 in that Parliament. Today, everything had been briefed. We could have written his speech for him from what has been in the FT over the last 4 weeks. So that was easy. The other thing as well is she had some political cover because they didn't do anything on non-doms. So she had a political attack line that she could bring, as well as blaming the Tories for what has happened. But yes, look, it is difficult. It's the hardest job in politics to be leader of the opposition, or in this case, Shadow Chancellor, because the government are able to set the debate, set the tone of the debate, set the parameters of the debate in the weeks preceding the statement and then in the statement. And to try and attack that and shift that is really difficult. But here, Labour do have the advantage that the Tories have got us in this mess. And so, whereas in 2010-15, Cameron and Osborne were brilliant at setting the terms of the debate, but they were able to do that because people in general, wrongly in my view, but people in general blamed Labour for the economic crash that led to the circumstances we were in. Today, the Tories cannot blame Labour for this. And I think the majority of people, although of course there are global factors, look back at what's happened under Liz Truss, and in fact what's happened over the last 10 years, and blame the government. And that is why Jeremy Hunt and Sunak's trick today I don't think is going to work.
Interesting. Kirsty, do you think that works as an attack? Is this where Labour are going to dine out for the next couple of years to the next election?
Yeah, I mean, Jake's absolutely right. This is about positioning the counter narrative, if you like, the counter argument. This isn't as a consequence of global factors, a global post-pandemic surge in inflation, which needs that kind of monetary brake put on it from interest rate rises. We saw Hunt talk about inflation in Germany being higher than Britain and interest rates in America being higher than they are in Britain. So placing it in that global context. And Rachel Reeves, who really did eat her Weetabix this morning and was really very fiery, said no. The economy was going wrong. Your management of the economy was going wrong before the pandemic, before these post-pandemic pressures came into being. The other thing that she was saying, so she was very clear on saying this is, as a consequence of decisions taken in Downing Street. This is a crisis made in Downing Street, not made out in a global kind of stage, and as a consequence of Russia's invasion of the Ukraine. The other thing that she's done, which I thought was clever, they've moved away very rapidly, and I think rightly, from as tempting as it is to make a lot of hay out of the Truss government and the Kamikaze budget, it's very important for Labour to stick this on 12 years of a Conservative government. You can't say everything that is wrong with the economy right now is a consequence of this. You can certainly say that budget made things considerably worse, but actually where they're positioning this is 12 years of a Conservative government. And if you look at the OBR figures, they say that income levels have fallen. They've fallen for the sharpest level on record, and they are now, our kind of disposable household income levels are what they were basically kind of 10 years ago. So, 12 years of Conservative rule have left households, no better than they were like a decade ago. So there's plenty for her to go on from an attack line, but it's very, very important to get this central message cut across here that this economic crisis was made in Downing Street. It wasn't made out on a global stage. It wasn't made in Russia. And I think she was very good actually on pushing that today. She was really impressive, probably the most impressive I've seen in quite some time in terms of an opposition response to an autumn statement, to a budget.
That's interesting. Jake, do you agree with that in terms of the impressive nature of Rachel Reeves today?
Yes, and actually, knowing Rachel, that's been coming. She came into Parliament in 2010 and she's incredibly ambitious, she's incredibly bright, she wants to be in government, she wants to be the first female Chancellor, that's her ambition. And I think she's been incredibly frustrated that what she feels the Tories have got away with it for too long. Whatever your political positioning, she thinks the Tories' management of the economy over the last 10 years has been pretty disastrous, and yet they have always been seen as more competent, more trusted on the economy until very recently. And that frustration, I think, came to the fore today and was channeled in an impressive way. And I do think it was a significant moment. There's a long way to go to the next general election, but I do think it was a significant moment that Rachel, and the reception she's got from commentators, which is important in these things, from across the political spectrum, is that she is an impressive, serious person whose economic analysis here is right. And it does remind me, and I must admit I was too young at the time, but from reading back about it, Gordon Brown as Shadow Chancellor, between 92 and 97, there were certain responses to budget, certain statements that are chronicled as being moments where at least the commentariat, maybe not the public, but the commentariat, who are important, suddenly think, hold on, we've got a serious figure here and someone who is really credible to be Chancellor. And actually, ultimately, it does cut through to the public because we're seeing that in opinion polls. This isn't a recent thing. This isn't just a Truss and Kwasi-Kwarteng thing. That Labour have been more trusted in the economy for quite some time, albeit narrowly, but quite some time. And if you look at between 2010 and 2015, when I was working for the party, that was never the case with Ed Miliband and Ed Balls. We were never more trusted than Cameron and Osborne on the economy. And in my view, that's probably the most important metric when you're looking at opinion polls. Forget about voting intention, forget about leaders and trust. I mean, they are all important, but actually, who is trusted with the public purse? And at the moment, that's Labour. And I think today will only strengthen that.
Is there I don't want to say an elephant trap, but I'm going to say, is there an elephant trap in here for Labour, though? And you mentioned 97. Obviously, when Tony Blair came in, one of the things that Labour did in opposition was promise to stick to Ken Clarke's spending plans to reassure the public that they were sound on the economy and they could be trusted with the economy. And the only way they could do it at the time was to say, we will follow a Conservative kind of framework. Now, obviously, because all the spending cuts are backloaded, they're past 24 election. In this, all the tax raises that are in this autumn statement are front-loaded. All the spending cuts are backloaded. The obvious question for journalists now going to Labour is, if the economy doesn't improve and if there is a need to continue with these spending cuts post-24, will you continue to do them or will you borrow more? And if you continue to do them, then how are you economically any different? And if you don't and say you're going to borrow more, can we really trust you with the economy? Has it caught them in that kind of dilemma?
Well, so there is a trap there, and there is always a political trap for oppositions there. And at the moment, Labour hasn't set out its full answer. I mean, that's perfectly clear. But I think it will do over the next 2 years. But I think it's slightly different between 2010 and 2015, where Ed Miliband and Ed Balls had this tortured attempt to say, do we stick to Tory spending plans? Do we just cut a bit less? Do we take on austerity on an ideological and intellectual level? And they never really came up with the answer, and no one really knew what the answer was, including people who work for them. So the public certainly didn't. I think the difference here is that I think Rachel Reeves, and one of the really interesting things of her response today, she actually sort of fronted up to this. She said, the Tories tried to set a trap for us. We're not going to fall into this because of these 3 reasons. Now, Kirsty, that doesn't answer your question as to what the final position will be.
I noticed that.
but I think Rachel, and it's interesting, you know, she was Shadow Chief Secretary during that 2010-15 Parliament, and she will be very aware of those traps and very, I think, deft in dealing with them. But look, where Labour will end up in terms of their fiscal rules, their spending commitments at the next election is a massive challenge for the party. But at the moment, that's why I said at the outset, the sole and main purpose of today was to pin this on the Tories. Make sure they don't get away with this. Those questions will come, don't you worry, especially with the press as it is. They will come. But Rachel, for the time being, I think, has enough capital to keep whacking the Tories for a bit before our spending plans will have to be set out in a bit more detail.
Jake, it is so good to speak to you. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining the podcast today. It's great.
A pleasure. That was really fun. See you guys soon.
Good. Yeah.